Hi, and welcome to another Ask Andy tutorial. This one is going to be a really quick idea on how to mix a tune in Pro Tools. Steve from Austria has this tune called The Bands of Yesterday, and he sent me the session. He's got a number of different plugins on different tracks, some of which I don't have, which are showing up as gray. And he's also got some auxiliary tracks here for slapback delay, reverb, distortion, and a submix bus before he goes to the master fader. He also had the drums within the plugin. In Easy Drummer 2, you can keep all the drum patterns within the plugin. I choose to bring that out so I can see it in the session. So I zeroed the session to the way that I like to work on it. And here we are with my version of the session. You can see at the top I've added markers that show the different areas of the tune. I've colored the tracks so that I've got my guitars in green. The vocals are in red and orange. There's also a response vocal to the lead. And my bass is in red up here. Here's my drum track up at the top. So the first thing to do is to get an idea of the song, and some of the references that you could apply for the song like this might be 90s bands like the Gin Blossoms or maybe Oasis. Here's an example of how it sounds. You might have to turn your monitors up for this portion because the mix is quiet to begin with. All right, so that's an idea of what the song's like. The second verse and second chorus are basically the same, as are the last choruses. And there's a small guitar break in here that I'll play now. And our ending. All right, so if you go and listen to the references, Gin Blossoms tunes like Hey Jealousy or Oasis, maybe Wonderwall or something like that, you're going to hear that the references are much more defined in the bass and in the bottom end, And they're also a little bit brighter sounding. And I think in this tune in particular, it's the vocal treatment that needs a little bit of help to get it to punch through over the whole band. So I'm going to spend a few quick minutes trying to get that together. First thing I'm going to listen to is the chorus again. And I'm just going to listen to the drums dry to get an idea of what they sound like. Just popped up the kick a little bit in volume. Let's listen to the bass and the drums together. So the bass doesn't sound too bad as it is, but I feel that we're not getting the definition from the bass, and we can't really hear it at the same time when the kick drum is hitting. Again, here's the drums. One, two, three, four. You can see the kick drum is hitting 4 to the beat. 4 on the floor. The bass is has got some slight syncopation in it, so it's not going to hook up exactly with what the kick drum is doing. So that is always going to make it difficult to mix a tune if you have the bass and the kick drum hitting on alternate beats or alternate parts of the beat, like if the bass is going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and the kick drum is going 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going to be hitting on different parts of the beat, and it's hard to make it sound powerful on the low end. Nonetheless, this is what I'm going to do to the bass. I'm going to dip out a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of definition up high. I'm also going to take a little bit of low shelf. Give it a little bit more beef down low. And I'm also going to take one band and I'm going to turn it into a slight and sharp cut right about where the kick drum likely is. And I know from experience that about 65 hertz is the resonant frequency of a 22-inch kick drum. So here's bass dry. And just a little bit more beef. Okay, now I'm going to play the kick drum and the bass together. Okay, I know that that's not going to cut it enough with the bass, so I'm going to do a couple other things here. First off, I'm going to duplicate my EQ, and I'm going to turn the EQ before compression into just one that has some cuts on it. and I'm going to turn the EQ post compression into one that only has boosts on it. This doesn't have to be the only way you can do it, but it's my preferred way of doing things. I like to clean things up, hit them with a compressor to make things even, and then add some EQ to restore the sound that I think we need. So I'm going to use only stock Pro Tools plugins on this mix as well. So I'm going to choose this BF76 and 1176. I know from experience that if you jam the attack and the release pretty quick on an 1176 and you put the ratio a little bit higher at 8 or 12 on bass, sometimes you can get a nice effect. All right. The thing about the 1176 is it will sound a little bit distorted if you hit it with a lot of level. So I'm also going to try another stock plug-in here. This is the regular Pro Tools one. Here I'm going to go with 4:1 ratio. Fairly quick release is what is already set up. 10 milliseconds is where I'm going to start with the attack. Well, actually, I'm going to go longer. I'm going to go about 30 milliseconds because on a bass or a kick drum, this will allow you to hear all of the attack, really. Trying to get it level matched. So here is just the stock Pro Tools compressor. Here's the 1176 style. The 1176 is introducing enough distortion to the sound that I'm going to add another way. I'm going to go back to the stock Pro Tools one. Trying to hear where the kick is and trying to get the bass in the same region. You can also go into the mixer, turn on the kick only. Go back to my EQ. Now, turning on the rest of the drum kit. Okay, so to me that feels a little bit better in the bottom end. I can feel both of those elements working together, and level-wise, they kind of seem like they're closer. Now the thing is, I'm going to turn in the vocal here and see what we can do with the three of those things together.
I hear the light. Yes, I will ignite.
Okay, that feels good as a starting place. Same thing with the vocal. There's often stuff in the bottom of the vocal that doesn't need to be there. My preference is to do some judicious low cutting.
I hear the light. Yes, I will ignite.
Now I'm going to look in the mid-range to see what's in the vocal and see if I can clear that up a little bit.
I hear the light.
On a lot of vocals below 1K, there's kind of some resonance that you can kind of comes out as a nosy sound.
I hear the light. Yes, I will.
Sometimes you want to take a little bit of that out. Adding some lower end on a vocal like 200 hertz can help.
I hear the light. Yes, I will ignite. I hear the lights.
And in the upper mid-range between 1K and 5K is where the intelligibility actually comes into the vocal. Blah, 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 blah. And you can hear a lot more of what he's actually saying.
I hear the light. Yes, I will ignite.
And up top, there's going to be a range of sibilants, usually in between 5 and 7K or 5 and 8. And then above that, usually you can do a little bit of boost if you have to open up the top of the vocal. And it'll usually be above the range that the sibilants usually sits. So I'm going to look at that right now, see what I can do.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will.
Okay, there's sibilants.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. I hear the lights. I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. I hear the lights.
So you can hear without the EQ, the vocal sounds a little bit dark, a little bit muffled. Here it is again without the EQ on.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. Love you more than I can say.
So here it is with the vocal and the EQ.
I hear the lights.
So the same thing as I did up on the bass, I'm also going to duplicate the EQ. The one before my compressor, I'm going to turn into a cut only. The one after where I put my compressor is going to be boost only. And then in between, I'm going to put my compressor in. And again, I'm going to choose the stock Pro Tools one. I'm going to start with the BF76. I'm going to leave it at the so-called Dr. Pepper setting. And I'm going to pump up the number of decibels of gain reduction we get to a little bit, so it's bouncing between 2 and 7.
I hear the lights. Yes, I
can see when he says I will, right here it jumps out in level a little bit. Or I'm sorry, when he says hear the, it's a little bit, it sounds a little bit closer to me when I turn on the compressor.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite.
If I were to turn off the bass and drums and listen and sort of reach out between my monitors and try to feel where the lead vocal is sitting, hopefully it's going to sort of seem to be in the same place.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite.
If you feel that the vocal is moving farther away from you or closer to you or sort of rising up in the air or down to the floor, or if certain syllables jump out at you, you can use compression to try to tame that and make the vocal sit rock solid in the track. Okay, so I'm going back to bass, drums, and vocal, and I'm going to turn on my EQ that's after the compressor and start messing with that to get the best sound I can.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than I can say. We'll find a way, to hear the bands of yesterday. I hear the light.
Trying to get the vocal at an approximately even level to the bass and drums like that. Now the other thing is you'll hear that the vocal is sounding now pretty dry. So you can do so many things with reverb and ambience. And what I'm going to do is put a slap delay in that I'm going to send some vocal to. I'm going to make it solo safe so that it's always on. I'm going to go into my regular Pro Tools plugins, delay, mod delay. I'm going to turn off sync because I don't want it to be dependent on the tempo of the song, and I'm going to hit 125 milliseconds because I find that usually works pretty good. So here's the vocal now, adding some slap delay in.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than that.
And I'm putting on a level that's kind of subliminal. You hear it and you miss it when it's gone, but you don't really hear it in the vocal.
I hear the light.
And that kind of gives it a little bit of a roomy sound. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to send to a reverb. And I'm going to make this mono again, and I'm going to call it vocal plate. Again, make it solo safe. On the reverb channel, I'm going to put an EQ first of all. And I know already that I'm going to want to filter this EQ so that I don't hear the entire vocal in it. Now I'm going to go back and I'm going to choose a standard Pro Tools reverb, deverb. So this is set for, I'm going to choose plate. Sure, that's pretty default on those settings. Let's see how that sounds.
Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than I can say. We'll find a way. To
Okay, so that's sounding closer to me. Now, the thing I notice about the bass is it could have been the EQ that I put on it, but it's sounding a little woofy in one particular area, and it's kind of like dominating the low end of the track and sitting in front of the vocal. So I'm going to go and see if I can clear that up a little bit.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than.
So I think I've zeroed it in on where it is. It looks like it's about 142 hertz, whatever note that is. I'm going to turn that into a cut now and see if that clears up the bass. And again, I'm going to turn on the bass, drums, and vocal and hear whether or not that clears it up.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love.
I think that's a little bit clearer. The other thing I'm going to do to the bass to make it a little bit audible is I'm going to send to a parallel distortion track, and I'm going to call it bass distortion. Also make it solo safe. And on this bass distortion track, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a stock Pro Tools kind of plug-in. Where's my Sans amp? I'm going to go choose a overdrive kind of preset, and I'm going to mix in some distortion in parallel with the bass.
I hear the lights.
That is crazy. How about something a little bit less? Let's go for the distorted bass. Now you could put this directly on the bass channel, but I prefer to do it in parallel so I can mix it in.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than I can say. We'll find a way.
And the idea is by adding parallel distortion to the bass, you get some extra mid-range harmonics that help to make it sit and be a little bit clearer in the track without it kind of being lost unless you have it really loud.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite.
Okay, and just to return back to the initial state that I had it. Here's with no EQ and no compressor.
I hear the lights. Yes,
Here's with the EQ and compression and the parallel bass distortion.
I hear the lights.
Okay. So now, you notice I haven't got the guitars on yet, and that's for a reason, because I'm trying to make the song work with the top and the bottom elements. The top being the vocal and the bottom being the kick and the drums. So now I'm going to turn on the guitars and see what I can do to those to make them work.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than I can say. We'll find a way.
Okay, so the guitars by themselves, if you listen in solo, it's kind of banging away, and there's not really any breaks in the guitar part. It kind of hammers through the whole song, kind of like that. It would help this song a lot if there were some more defined guitar parts, which actually had some areas of not playing, like rests. It would help to give the chorus more definition and more punch, and it would be easier to hear what's going on. So these guitars are going to be sort of straddling the the role of being background and foreground at the same time. So we have to try to get a sound that works for both. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to listen to this guitar and see what it actually sounds like with these various ranges of EQ. So it's easy to make it thin. And it seems like about there is where I start to lose the bottom end of the guitar. So rolling off a little bit of low bottom isn't a big deal for me because I know the bass is going to cover that and the kick is going to cover that as well. Now let's check out what's happening in the rest of the guitar. I can almost assure you that there's going to be something here that's going to make it sound woofy. That's bottom. That is kind of like, you hear that kind of harmonic sound like you're sweeping a wah-wah pedal. So what happens if I dip a little bit of that? And then let's check out the higher mid-range and see what it sounds like there. There's a sort of a pronounced tone there at 1K, which is pretty normal. And then as you hear, as we get higher, you get the clarity of the guitar coming out. So with a little bit of low end roll off of the stuff we don't really miss anyways, a little bit of a dip here where it sounded kind of boxy and woofy, and a little bit more clarity. Let's see what it sounds like now. Very slight change. Now, if it's a guitar recorded through an amp sim, if you pump high end, often it's going to sound just scratchy and gross. If it's a real guitar, generally an amplifier speaker doesn't really reproduce a lot of high end anyways, so it kind of rolls off. Let's just poke around and see what it sounds like. Yeah, that's gross. And up around there, you don't really get any change, positive or negative. What about in between the two? No, it sounds pretty fizzy to me, so I'm not going to bother. Okay, I'm going to copy this EQ to the next guitar track just as a starting point, and then we'll see what happens after that. Okay, so this one Steve had labeled in his original tracks. One of these was recorded with a single coil pickup on a guitar. The other one was a humbucker, I believe. This definitely sounds like the humbucker, or at least maybe a neck position, because it sounds way thicker. And so we'll probably have to do some adjustment on this EQ to get some clarity. So again, I'm going to work with the bottom. Ha ha ha. Now it also helps if I'm using the right EQ. Let's try this again. I'm going to roll up the low pass filter a little bit higher on this one. I don't really get that gross mid-range sound too much, so I'll go back and work higher. Now here, I kind of hear the definition of the strumming. Okay, here's without. Here's with. Working with this boosted band so it doesn't kind of sound like there's a high ringing. If you have the Q too sharp, you can hear it ringing up high. Okay, a little bit more clarity. Let's see what these sound like together now. And without the EQ. Whoops. And back with on. Very slight difference. A little bit cleaner to my ear. Okay. Next thing is to see what else we can do to spice that up. Now, the thing about distorted guitars is they get compressed by nature. An amplifier, when it's turned up to distortion, it tends to compress a guitar. So sometimes adding another compressor on top of that doesn't really help to even out the level of the guitar or make the performance any better. But depending on the compressor set, sometimes you can get a little bit of difference in sound, which can make it sound more aggressive. So I'm just going to spend a minute trying that. Trying the all buttons in mode. Shift clicking on the ratio. Now try just a straight ratio of 4:1. Trying to keep it level matched so I don't fool myself into thinking one's better than the other. play with the attack and release. Seems like really slow attack and faster release is definitely the brightest, which makes sense. As you decrease the attack time on a compressor, usually it makes things dark. There's a little bit, touch more mid-range with the compressor on. I'm going to leave it there. It's very slight. You could choose either way, likely. It's not really making that much difference into how even it sounds, because like I said, the guitars are ringing, 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 and there's not really any quiet parts in the performance where there's rests. Here's the other guitar now. Now this one is sounding a little bit more even with the compression on. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate those original EQs I put on those channels, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to get rid of my boosts before the compression, and I'm going to turn on boosts after compression. So here's before the compressor, a little bit of low end cut, then the compressor, then after the compressor there's just a boost. Some people choose to boost and cut before compressors or after compressors. It's all up to you. This is the way I like to do it and makes sense to me. Okay, here's the two guitars. Okay, without any EQ or compression. And with EQ and compression. You can see when you rapidly switch from no EQ and compression to compressed and EQ'd, the top end sounds about the same. You still get the same kind of like cloud, distortion cloud on the top. The bottom end and the mid-range is where you hear the difference. Now, because we are mating these guitars with the bass and drums and the low end of the vocal, you have to figure out whether or not the low end of the guitars is too much or not enough. Let's turn on the rest of the things that I was working with originally, the drums, the bass, and the vocal, and see where we're at.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than I can say.
Okay, that's a good starting point for everything there. Now, I know this is Steve singing on all these vocal tracks because I've listened to them in solo. So he's doing his own doubles. So an easy way to get things happening really quick for a mix is just to copy the stuff you have on your primary vocal to your secondary vocal tracks and then have a listen.
I hear the light.
Now he's got a low harmony on here. If there's too much low end, it's gonna just make things muddy down low. So I'm gonna play with a low end cut here and see whether or not I can make that a little bit clearer.
I hear the light.
Because what I want to hear is the harmony. I don't necessarily want to hear a lot of beef down low. The beef is on the original vocal track.
I hear the light.
Listen to the harmony vocal with a lot of low end.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite.
And then, see, when I rolled off the low end, it cleared things up. Same thing with the response vocal. At the end of the chorus, there's a response.
We'll find a way. Find a way.
Now, I know that response vocal is going to need a little bit of help, so it pops out and sounds exciting. And you can hear there's a really pronounced sibilant area at the start of the syllable when he says find. So in any DAW, usually, or workstation, whatever you're working in, usually you have gain controls for the regions that are in the session, and then you have track volume that you can manipulate as well. In Pro Tools, you can use what's called clip gain, and you can take a part of the clip and manipulate the gain. So let's see what this sounds like. That versus this. Okay, versus this. There's kind of like a low end and then when I go back into what I've automated, it's a little bit less, and we're just looking for like a little bit better. Sometimes you can't clear everything up, so it's 100%. So I'm going to go look at the other two examples of the same thing here. Gonna do the same thing. It's kind of hard to make it much better. I'm just trying to get it like 10 or 20% better with a quick move. All right, let's look at all three vocals now put together.
Find a way. Find a way.
We got a little bit less level on this response, so let's equalize it to the main vocal.
Find a way to hear the find a way. Find a way. Find a way. Find a way to find a way. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than I can say. We'll find a way. Find a way to hear the bands of yesterday.
So you can see that the response vocal doesn't have anything that's really different in characterizing it from the main vocal. There's nothing really different in character. So you could go to a different track on that. I'm going to call it vocal delay stereo. Again, I'm going to make it solo safe so it plays all the time. And I'm going to, this time, insert a delay plugin. Here's the stock Pro Tools one. I'm going to choose it to be an 8th note delay.
Yes,
Let's work just here.
find a way. Find a way.
Let's try quarter note.
Find a way.
Okay, so it's kind of a little bit loud right now, but the other thing we can do is we can filter that delay. We can put an EQ before it or after it. I choose to put things before. I'm going to roll off the bandwidth of the delay so there's no low end and there's less high end. Let's see what it sounds like.
Find a way.
Now, because it's only used for the one track, we can even go longer.
Find a way.
And let's get a little bit of feedback happening so it repeats a couple times.
Find a way.
Yeah, that might be a little bit too much. How about
Find a way.
this is the same thing here, the low pass filter that's inside the delay. It's the same thing as the EQ that I put on the delay channel itself. It's just taking off some low end.
Find a way.
Now, it would also be cool if we could get rid of the other bits of the vocal that we hear there, the headphone bleed. So let's just take this and roll it up like this.
Find a way.
Yeah, cleaner. Okay. Now the other thing you can do with delays is you can send the delay itself to reverb as well. And this has got to be a bug in Pro Tools. You see, I can find it. I can find the delay here, but I can't find it if I send a track. But anyways.
Find a way. Find a way.
It makes the delays sound a little bit farther in the background because they're also running through the reverb of the vocal. Okay, let's check out the chorus now from start to end and see what it actually sounds like.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than I can say. We'll find a way. to hear the bands of yesterday.
Okay, last thing for a quick mix. Some kind of mastering effect to bring this mix up to a competitive level. In Pro Tools, you can stick it right on the master fader. Some kind of dynamics, some kind of compression to get a relative level. Let's go 2:1. Let's go 30 milliseconds on the attack. And then see what it sounds like. This is typical based on an SSL compression that's often put on a mix bus.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than I can say.
Up here you can see that this is the actual gain reduction between 1 and 3 dB most of the time.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And
Level match it.
I hear the lights.
Try some different attack. The next attack time on an SSL compressor is usually 10 milliseconds.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite.
Do things sound a little bit more collected, a little cleaner? Possibly. A little bit more glue.
I hear the lights.
I can actually hear that when the compressor's on, it actually ducks the vocal a little bit in the beginning of the phrases here. Let's try something, some broad brush strokes with EQ on the master as well.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than I can say. We'll find a way to hear the bands of yesterday. I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than I can say. We'll find a way to hear the bands of yesterday. I hear the lights. Yes, I.
Okay. Last thing, master limiting. Within Pro Tools, we have this maxim. You can see that if you link these threshold and ceiling, it's going to pull down the ceiling as you pull down the threshold. So it should be more or less constant gain. And you should be able to hear whether you're killing the mix without killing it, distorting it rather, or making it clean and louder.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite.
Obviously bad. You can see the attenuation here will show you when you're actually getting gain reduction.
I hear the lights.
So this is a very small amount of gain reduction, but on master limiting it's usually appropriate. We'll pull the ceiling down so that we don't get any distortion in an MP3.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will.
Sorry about the increase in volume there.
I hear the lights. Yes, I will ignite. And she says, I love you more than.
Now I can hear in this particular drummer that we're using, the kick is getting a little bit lost to me. So what can we do? Perhaps mess inside the plug-in. Perhaps go to an EQ that's on the drums and try to bring out a little bit more of the click. See if we can do that. Here's more of the thud of the kick drum. We'll see how that sounds against the vocal. Got to bring up our lead guitar to a similar volume as we have our rhythm guitars. So again, I'm going to copy some EQs and compressors. And I'm going to copy some stuff from the lead vocal onto that guitar as well. Reverb's not making it sound any better. Let's see about the EQ. so that's about it on this one. Without adding more parts, replaying parts, significantly changing the sounds, that's about what we have. And I'm just going to bounce one out. Thank you.